In the depths of fiery Mordor, there lives a world of sweet Kiwi, different accents, and once pregnant a Prime Minister who now sits on a throne that spins in a direction unknown to most. Today, we do life in New Zealand. This is a podcast designed for BCD people with BCD people. On this show, we're celebrating the diverse workplace cultures and connecting people across functions with our most confident self-colleagues. So come on, let's go have some fun as we feed our future learning about the business, each other, and life at BCD. So Becky Va'a, welcome to the podcast this week.
Thank you. It's very nice to be here.
And don't you even know how stoked I am right now to speak to you. So Becky, why don't you just give us your background and then you can kind of bleed into the background of maybe BCD New Zealand and then we can roll from there.
Sure, absolutely. So I've been in the corporate travel industry for just over 20 years, which I don't like saying because that sort of gives you an indication of how old I am. And I have worked for a few travel management companies, one here in Wellington, where I am born and bred. And then when I moved overseas with my husband for 4.5 years, I continued working in corporate travel and then came home to New Zealand coming up to 10 years ago, where I took the role at BCD, and I have been here ever since.
And what role is that? What lovely role do you own down there in BCD?
Well, because we're a smaller team, so my role covers program management, sales, and implementations. So I go by my title of client relationship manager, but I sort of start the process in the sales piece. At the end of the implementation, which I also manage, I'll then manage the account at the end. So I see it from start to finish.
Wow. So an all-rounder person wearing many, many hats. Now, Becky,
Yes.
if you could kind of come out a couple of layers here, could you maybe talk to us about BCD New Zealand? Who runs the show down there? How many is on your team? You said you're in Wellington. Where is that? And is it an office? Like, run us through the gauntlet there.
Oh, sure. So, we have an office based in Wellington City, and everyone works in the office day to day. We don't really have too many people working from home on a day-to-day basis. However, we can if we need to. And then who runs the show? Mr. Becky Va'a is our managing director. Pete's been in travel, I won't tell you how long because I might lose my job, but for some time. He's very well known in New Zealand in the travel and corporate travel industry. And so our office comprises of about 30 people, so we're not a massive team, and that's why, quite a few of us wear many hats. And then we also have our corporate division, we have our meeting and events division, we've also got a sports division that have just seen the light at the end of the Rugby World Cup tunnel, as we were sub-ticket agents for that. And so we've had quite a few people in Japan, and they're just sort of starting to come back to the office now. So we're hearing lots of fun, exciting stories. We miss out a couple of stories when it comes to the All Blacks, but then we move on. And then we also
for some of our listeners that don't know what the All Blacks are, what's the All Blacks?
The All Blacks is the New Zealand rugby team. We're very passionate about rugby down here at the bottom of the world. And usually we do very, very well, but we have our England foes who we're better on the day, and it's probably best left said like that. And so that's the sports division. They've been very busy. And then we also have our film division. So we look after the likes of Peter Jackson, who does, the Lord of the Rings, all of those films. So, it's a varied team considering how small we are.
And I can't wait to talk more about all of the great stuff coming out of New Zealand in just a second, Becky. So you say that it's Pete, yourself, you've got a team of about 30. For our listeners that don't know, Wellington, is that the North Island or the South Island? Where is that geographically?
Okay, so Wellington is the capital of New Zealand, and we're based right at the bottom of the North Island. And so you can sort of catch a ferry from Wellington down to the South Island and continue your ventures. I think a lot of people, when they travel to New Zealand, and I hear it from my global colleagues in the BCD team, they're like, we're going to come and we're going to see Auckland and we're going to see Rotorua, and they're two sort of places further up the country. But I was like, no, you don't really want to do that. You need to see the South Island, because that's where, we're known for our scenery, and you see it in all these movies that Peter Jackson makes. And that's all in the South Island. So I always try and tell them to come down to see us in Wellington, and then we'll send them on their way down to the South Island.
And while we're in geography there, Becky, what is it, about a 4-hour drive from top to bottom of the North Island?
Everyone thinks we're tiny. We're not that small. It's probably top for the North Island, top to bottom would be, I'd say, 11 hours.
Whoa!
I know. We are actually quite a big country. We just seem very small, and as I keep saying, we're at the bottom of the world, so people don't know much about us. So, there is some space here.
So you've covered a gamut of different kind of subsections within the BCD office there in Wellington. Becky, with all your experience, what would you say is some of the accelerating pieces of business that you're finding in your role, as well as some of the toughest challenges that you face in New Zealand as a BCD travel salesperson?
I'd say the biggest growth currently right this minute seems to be our film business, just because Peter Jackson have a few films on the go. But in the corporate space, because I work very closely with our regional and global sales teams, that space has slowed down a little bit this year. We haven't seen too many new clients come on board, which for me actually allows me to then have some more time to manage the accounts that we currently have on the books. Challenges, I think it's just the difficult sort of nature of budgets. I think for our clients, you're seeing a lot of restrictions coming into place and travel bans and that kind of thing. And usually if, we're doing it tough in the economy, the first budgets they'll cut is travel. So when I'm out and about seeing our clients, I'm often hearing, we're putting travel bans in place, or we're really trying to cut down on our travel. That seems to be the common theme across a lot of clients. It's not just one or two, it's just, and towards this end of the year. So for us, we work mainly to the calendar year. So being in November, I'm not really sure how we got to November already, but we're really coming into everyone's sort of dying for summer to actually arrive. And we have our 6 weeks sort of summer break right over Christmas. So we're kind of coming into that winding up period of the year, but we're still seeing tight availability in terms of accommodation all around the country. And I think, people overseas also don't necessarily understand when New Zealand locations are busy, they actually really are busy. And we don't have enough availability to manage without charging some hideously high rates in the hotel space.
Really interesting. And in regards, you said budgets before, and it made me think of just the APAC region at the moment. How do you, as a New Zealand, as one of the New Zealand team there, how do you feel when it comes to being connected to the overall APAC region? Do you feel that you are very, very far away? You say the bottom of the world, but I mean, I hear so much rumblings about how tight the APAC team is. Can you maybe run us through how do you stay connected, being so far away geographically?
Yeah, absolutely. We are a tight-knit bunch. I think it sort of comes, I work incredibly closely, my colleague Kim, who has the same role as myself. We work very closely with the Australian team. Yeah, I don't know. There's always that New Zealand Australian thing. But when we have to, we work very well. Because more often with us and in corporate clients, a lot we share the same contacts. So I report in on the client side, I report into sort of the procurement teams that are based in Australia. So it makes sense for us to work closely with our Australian colleagues. So the client sort of sees the connection. We are in different countries, we do work off different systems, but we do try and provide the same detail so they don't see too many differences. In terms of further afield with APAC, as much as I report into Pete being my boss, I report into Singapore as well. So the regional account management team are very sparse. They could be Singapore, Hong Kong. I have a regional account manager in China. I have a couple in Australia. So I'm always, from the program management side, I'm always emailing or having weekly, fortnightly, monthly phone calls with our regional team, and sometimes global calls as well. And then, because my role covers sales and account management, I work with all these different divisions. So we are very connected. It's sort of a daily, email communication, or usually a fortnightly or monthly call across all spans of the business. So I actually find, I feel I'm lucky because I do get to connect with lots of different people, which helps, fight the cause. Because New Zealand is small and at the bottom of the world, we are known to be opinionated on matters, I guess is a nice way to put that. And we will certainly share our views. And I think, you have an airline like Air New Zealand that often leads the industry in the way they do things.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It is often, we spend a lot of time explaining or trying to explain why things are so different here. And it takes a lot of understanding to get that across, I think.
I think that you're completely on point there. And as I look from afar, Becky, just Air New Zealand to New Zealanders as a whole, both the comedic side, the drive side, and you say opinion, I would say influential side, really does impact a lot further than potentially people know. And for some of our listeners, if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm going to include a cool YouTube clip that goes to Air New Zealand during the World Cup, where the New Zealanders are making fun of the Irish. It's completely on point to the message we're talking to right here. It's very, very funny. So
yes.
and to give a bit
it
more,
is very us too.
Yes, it was right. And I was like, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And not just as a Southern fellow hemisphere born and bred chap, it's also just, it's true to the brand. And I think it's great. Becky, something else came up. We were talking before. You said 11 hours top to bottom of the North Island. To paint some perspective, could you give us some estimates how, when you fly to Sydney from Wellington, when you fly from to Singapore, or maybe even to Hong Kong, what are the distances of flights, just so people can understand how far away we are?
So we'll do from Wellington, because this is where I usually fly from. Across to Sydney, it's sort of 3.5 hours.
Okay.
Up to Singapore, you're looking at, depending on which way you go, because historically speaking, we had to fly up to Auckland or go down to Christchurch to then fly out of the country. So it always takes us, when I do go to our regional meetings, they always sort of say, how long did it take you to get here? It's like, days, because you feel like you're traveling around the world to get anywhere. So over up to, it's like a 10-hour flight, say, from Auckland to Singapore.
Oh, wow.
But we're very excited because within the last couple of years, Singapore Airlines now fly into Wellington, and you go via Melbourne.
Great.
And then you go over to Singapore. So we don't have to go up to Auckland and Christchurch. We can fly via Melbourne. So it's still not direct. We're not quite there yet. Our runway in Wellington is very small. So we can't have the bigger planes coming in here. So just last week, on the 1st of November, Singapore Airlines are flying their new A350 aircraft into Wellington. So it's our first aircraft that has premium economy on it that is flying out of Wellington. So it's big news for us little old Wellingtonians.
Wellingtonians, I like plane. That. That's fun.
Yeah, that's what we are. And it's a big plane, for our little runway. So, if you really haven't flown worldwide, if you haven't had a rough landing into Wellington, we're known for it. Wellington is known as Windy Wellington because we get high winds, and it's white knuckle rides coming into Wellington sometimes. You really got to just pray you're going to land on a short runway.
That's fun.
Yeah, you're tough if you can fly into here.
So, Becky, that must impact, just as you speak through that must impact your business as well, right? Because you've got clients, like you're saying, to have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 hours away when you're so far away.
Yeah, that's right. And it does impact. The biggest impact you'd sort of see is, and something that we're always discussing is within our business, a lot of the bookings are being made on using online booking tools. And for other markets, it makes complete sense to make international bookings online because it's very easy. Because you don't have too many point-to-point options across all of New Zealand. It doesn't always make sense, and it's not best practice to book online, international bookings online, because the tools aren't built enough when it comes to getting the right airfares. So our teams are heavily involved at making sure that the airfares are correct. We do encourage point-to-point bookings. Then they would ordinarily need to be flying ex-Auckland, which is one of our main international gateways, and Christchurch is the other one. But yeah, it certainly does impact. It's not a simple, booking international travel from New Zealand isn't the most simple of processes. Just because where we are, you do have to go you do often have to go one or two places to get to anywhere.
Fantastic, Becky. Is there anything else that you wish to share about BCD New Zealand before we begin to wrap up this episode?
No, I think, we're very lucky. We're very well looked after. We have a great office. I'm pretty sure, because of our regional links, I think Greg O'Neill and quite a few of the management are convinced we just roll into work with our jandals on. And more often than not, you probably would see that here. That's have fantastic. A great team. We have plenty of laughs. Because we
can hear them in the background actually right now,
I know. They're in the kitchen making smoothies because that's what you do at 10:30 in the morning.
Oh, well, actually, while you're there, it is 4 p.m. in Atlanta. Well, 4:20 p.m. in Atlanta on Monday right now. What time is it there?
Right, so it's 10:20 in the morning on Tuesday morning over here.
Wow. Okay.
So that's another thing we sort of have to fight for, because we're the first country in the world to see the day. So sometimes when my global colleagues think it's okay to put a phone call in my calendar at 4:00 on a Friday, no, that's not okay.
Saturday.
We don't do that. Yeah, no, exactly. No, even if it is 4:00 Friday New Zealand time, because it's Thursday their time, they think that's an acceptable call time. But Kiwis, as we're known, by 4:00 on a Friday, your mind's pretty much out the door and on its way into the weekend.
Fantastic. Well, let me ask, as we wrap this up, Becky, a couple of questions for our listeners that may have always wondered but never really understood New Zealand. Which side of the road do you drive on there in New Zealand?
Left.
Which way do the toilets swirl when you flush? Do you even know?
Clockwise, I think.
Okay. Do you have a president?
I'm going to have to look at that now, aren't I?
Do you have a president? Do you have a prime minister?
Oh, everyone knows who our prime minister is, Jacinda Ardern. She has done a lot in the last sort of 12 months. First prime minister to have a baby.
Oh. And a female?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And female. Oh, no, she's about our third female prime minister. Okay. So that's not new for us, but yeah, the first in the world to have a baby whilst sitting in the seat. So yeah, she's pretty impressive.
How does she have time for all of that?
And so therefore, like we all do. We all have time to be working parents.
New Zealand is a Commonwealth country, correct?
Correct.
Very much so. And I think because a lot of our listeners are here in the US go, what's that? And I'll let them look that up on their own. Becky, when we see movies, when we see whether it's Hollywood stars or whatnot, talk about New Zealand, and sometimes even in the news, we see a tradition in the New Zealand culture where whether it's boy or girl, it doesn't matter, but they put their noses together. Could you maybe explain real quick what that is?
Yeah, so that's a Māori culture. Well, we have a lot of Māori culture in New Zealand, and that's just part of it. It's like probably the more common known would be the haka that you see the All Blacks or any New Zealand team representing the country, and will do a haka, and it's part of the sort of challenge before they go ahead and play, whether it's rugby or you see it everywhere, basketball. So the hongi is another thing. It's part of the Māori culture, and it's part of your greeting. So more often that would happen in the space of a marae, which is a Māori meeting house. So it's not, you wouldn't see myself doing it, say, when I'm seeing colleagues or anything like that. It's sort of part of the Māori culture, that you would see that.
And three of the biggest movies to come out of New Zealand, you said Lord of the Rings. What are some of the other big ones?
So Lord of the Rings, there'd be Avatar. And then, so that's all sort of Peter Jackson, and he's the Weta Film Group that is massive, and as I say, we're lucky enough that we look after their travel. But more recently, Taika Waititi is another New Zealand producer he's starting to sort of make a name for himself. And so he's bringing out quite a few movies as well, and he's actually working with a lot of sort of probably more well-known actors around the world. So, we might be little, but we are starting to make a bit of presence in the world, and things like film, but in sports, and, in all areas.
Well, Becky, I've really appreciated getting to know more about the BCD business down there and reliving some of the New Zealand culture. Gosh, I love that country. So to all of our listeners, shout out to Becky. I'm going to include your details in the show notes here in case anyone had any other specific questions. Becky, how do you say goodbye in Maori?
Kakite.
Kakite?
Yes, that's it. You got it.
And that's it to you.
Or harera, there's various words.
On a Tuesday morning. Thank you again for spending time. And thank you all for joining us on Life at BCD.
It's been great. Thank you.
Middle Earth. One ring to rule them all.